hopefully Zoom has caught up and we can get going. So, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are across the country right now. And I'm really pleased to be joined here by Nicole Storeshaw today, our Director of Government Relations here at CHBA at the National Office. And of course, we're here to talk about the federal election results and what it means for the residential construction industry and how we've engaged ourselves from a CHBA perspective and where we're at. So, just in terms of logistics, before we get started, of course, we've got everybody muted, so we have good sound control, we hope. And we normally have interactive webinars and sort of handle questions as we go. But we've got quite a bit to cover, so we're just going to do that all at the end. But we have left time. We'll make sure we have time to get through questions at the end, and you can ask those questions through the Zoom question panel. And if you haven't used Zoom before, you can also adjust the size of the slides and that by just moving the dividing bar back and forth, left and right. And the webinar will be available. The recording will be available tomorrow up on our website. So if you want to take a look at it again or share it with anybody else, then within your organization, then you'll be all set to do that by tomorrow. All right, then. So, as I said, really pleased to be joined today by Nicole here. And we'll get started with first asking a couple of questions. Always like to know where everybody is logging in from. So, we'll fire up a quick poll here to see what part of the country you're in. And certainly, what part of the country you're in is very relevant today. Relates very much to housing starts. Relates a fair amount to what kind of voting happened across the country, although typical in the provinces, it breaks down in different ways. All right. So, yeah, pretty much directly reflective of our membership. We about almost half the people in Ontario, and then 23% and 18% in Alberta, and then some folks from the other prairie provinces and folks from Atlantic Canada. So a pretty good cross section reflective of our membership. And then our next question, I always like to know this too. What best describes the business that you're in? Builder, developer, renovator, all of our associated businesses, or are you one of the staff at one of our local or provincial HBAs? Again, we usually get a pretty reflective cross section this way as well. All right. All right, excellent. Again, same type of thing. Great to see so many builders and developers on at 42 and 28% respectively. We got renovators and contractors, manufacturers and suppliers, all around 7, 8%. 14% professional services, great. Some government folks and some HBA staff at 8%. So we got a great cross section of folks with us today. That sets you up, Nicole. It's almost like vote tabulation, but different. So over to you as we start to talk about what happened here with the election from a political perspective.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a lot to cover, so let's jump right into the results of the election and what it's going to mean for the next session of Parliament. So the first slide is the comparison of parties and how many votes they received and the share of the vote that they've received. The Liberals just missed out on achieving a majority. The number for majority is 172 seats, and the Liberals came up just short at 169. And of course, they still need to choose a Speaker of the House of Commons, and typically that person comes from the government benches. So once that person is chosen, they will be back down to 169. So there, however, could change because there are still some very, very close races throughout many ridings in the country, and there could be recounts. So once again, these numbers could shift, and they are very, very close, very, very tight. as I mentioned, both the Liberals and Conservatives were very close in the number of votes and vote share, with both parties achieving over 40% of the vote share, which is not something that happens very often. Part of that can be attributed to the NDP completely tanking in their support during the election, and to a lesser extent, the Bloc Québécois as well. The Liberals had a net gain of 15 seats, which meant they were up by over 11% from their results in the 2021 election. The Conservatives also had a net gain of 15 seats, and for them, that was an improvement of just almost 8% from 2021. The Bloc lost, I believe, 12 seats. The NDP lost 17, and the Green Party had 2 seats at the last parliament and are now down to 1. All right, this next slide is to demonstrate how quickly things can change in politics. The map on the left is from January, and it was showing who they thought at the time was going to be winning the next election. And it was Conservatives with a resounding majority, to the point where the Bloc was going to be the official opposition and the Liberals were going to be down in third. And as you can see by the color scheme, that the Conservatives, with the exception of Quebec and the North, were going to dominate throughout the whole country. Now, this was last updated on January 5th, which was the day before Justin Trudeau resigned and 2 weeks before President Trump was inaugurated. Well, since then, there's been a lot of change. And so you'll look at the map on the right, which was from the day after the most recent election, and how things have changed. The Liberals just lost having a majority, and the Conservatives didn't quite win the massive majority that they thought, not just they, but everyone thought that they were going to win. And there's a quote here that I'm taking from David Coletto, the CEO of Abacus Data. And we're very lucky. We're going to be having David as our opening plenary speaker next week in Victoria at our Home Building Week. And he's done a lot of analysis on what happened in this period of time. And he says that in hindsight, it's clear that Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of the Conservative Party, was campaigning for the country we were in, whereas Mark Carney was campaigning for the country Canadians feared that we were becoming. So that is very true, and we will talk about that on the next slide as well. So looking at the Liberal Party and what has happened and where they got their support and how they managed to sneak out a fourth mandate, I would say that they have won a strong minority. And what I mean by strong minority is they only need a very small handful of people from other parties to vote with them in order to pass legislation. And I don't think it's going to be too difficult to sort of come up with those types of numbers. And another reason is a strong minority is, oh, I skipped out, there we go, that Canadians are no longer in an appetite to have another election anytime soon. There's a lot of chaos and uncertainty in the world, and I think they kind of would like sort of steady as she goes for the next little while. So I think for now that they would be in what is considered that strong minority situation. Having said that, though, Canadians are still divided over wanting a change or wanting a steady hand to face Trump. So just because Trump and the tariffs and the 51st state nonsense has come up doesn't mean the other issues of concern to Canadians for so long have gone away. Part of the reason why the Liberals were successful is they had strength amongst older Canadians, and for the purposes of voting demographics, that would be 55 and older. And the exit polls suggested that the top issue that drove their vote towards the Liberals is that the Canadian relationship with the US was above the economy and affordability in terms of top concerns. And you can see by the demographics right at the bottom of the slide that certainly that they helped deliver Mark Carney his victory, with 52% of 55-year-olds and over who voted supported the Liberals. But look at the two other groups, the 18 to 34 and the 35 to 54, who supported the Conservatives over the Liberals, because these are the age groups where the economy, affordability, stability of your job, needing a home, those are still very much front and center issues. Whereas the older demographic, some of these people are by and large could be retired and not too sort of worried about changes to the economy, and certainly probably paid off their homes. So this is where they received a lot of their vote strength. And just one more point I would like to make is Mark Carney is still a relative unknown to most Canadians. Now, Canadians are quite well aware of his business experience, being the governor of the Bank of Canada as well as England, and they really liked his resume and felt that he was the person with the right temperament and the right business experience to be able to handle Donald Trump. But by and large, people don't know what type of leadership style he has. The Liberal leadership race that he won was shortened, and people really didn't get a good enough glimpse of the type of person he is unless you were an active Liberal voter and were paying attention to that. And when he won the leadership and became prime minister, he called an election the next week. And sure, Canadians did have a chance to see him a bit over the election and snippets on the news, but no one really knows how he's going to be as the prime minister in the House of Commons, dealing with the issues like affordability and housing, and how he's going to work with other parties. That all remains to be seen for everyone. Now, the Conservatives, this is quite an interesting story, especially when a few months ago they were 20 points up, and every pollster was predicting a massive majority. Well, while they did better than previous elections in the total number of seats and popular vote, they still wound up losing out to the Liberals. And in a really big shock is the leader Pierre Poilievre lost his seat here in Ottawa. It was decided, however, he will stay on as party leader and will run in a by-election in Alberta. The member of parliament for Battle River Crowfoot has stepped aside to allow Pierre to run there in what is considered a winnable riding. So he should be, once they call the by-election and he does the campaign, back in the House of Commons. But in the meantime, needing a leader within the House of Commons for when it resumes, the caucus has chosen Andrew Scheer, who's a former leader of the party, to become that interim leader in Parliament. Now, at the moment, there seems to be a widespread support amongst caucus saying they support him as leader. But usually, when a very disappointing loss like this happens, there's always a movement that is afoot about a blame game and who's responsible for the loss. And I would anticipate over the next few weeks, we're going to start to hear more about that. But just a couple of points from myself about where they possibly have gone wrong in the campaign is the Conservatives really appeared to struggle to pivot their messaging after Justin Trudeau stepped down and the start of the tariff threats. This whole time, it sort of felt, at least for the first 2 weeks of the campaign, that they were still feeling that they were campaigning against Justin Trudeau without sort of recognizing the reality of a different leader and also the threat coming out of the United States. Another big problem was their cost of platform was released after the advanced polls. And if anyone was paying attention to the news, the advanced polling broke all kinds of records for the numbers of Canadians that turned out to vote. And at that point, if you haven't released your platform, well, you're too late because a big chunk of Canadians this time had already made up their mind. So the platform got released after the advanced polls, and many policies did also appear incomplete. And I personally believe that was to do with the fact that they felt that the platform they were going to run on was going to be used against Justin Trudeau, and they didn't really need to have something too in-depth or too fulsome because it would be easy to defeat Justin Trudeau. So there's going to be a lot more discussion in the coming weeks about what sort of really went wrong, but those are two things that really stand out to me. Now, it's still really important to mention that Canadians still want change, but the question is Pierre, does he have the type of personality to be able to lead them into victory next time? Now, the new Democratic Party was also a really big story from election night because they were reduced to unofficial party status, and their leader, Jagmeet Singh, quit. He did not win his riding. In fact, he came in third in his riding. And so he has stepped down as party leader, and they have chosen a member of parliament, Don Davis, to be their interim leader. They lost 17 seats, 10 of which went to the Conservatives, 7 went to the Liberals. Many of the Liberal voters went, or many NDP voters went Liberal. Some say it's called strategic voting, and that they didn't want a Conservative government, or they didn't want Pierre Poilievre as their prime minister, so they decided to throw their support behind the Liberals in order to stop a Conservative victory. And when I say in this slide, timing is everything, is last fall, when Jagmeet Singh had decided to tear up his agreement with the party, the Liberal Party, to continue to support them, which he had in place for almost 4 years, saying that the NDP will support the Liberals and keep them in power. He decided to rip up that agreement, but he didn't want to go to an election right then. Had he decided to go to an election at that time, he could have been the official opposition leader today. It just is crazy how things in such a short period of time have changed. So they are also the 7 MPs they have left, perhaps at risk of losing some of them, because there could be movement underway from the Liberals to try and approach some of those MPs to come on over and cross the floor and join the Liberals, and that would perhaps bring the Liberals up to a majority territory. And just the last point I want to say on this slide is it's going to take a long time to rebuild the NDP financially and from a policy standpoint. So for the foreseeable future, Canada has a two-party system, and that's going to be kind of a different way to have to sort of learn to operate within that system. So earlier this week on Tuesday, Mark Carney had his first public meeting with Donald Trump, which took place in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump praised Carney for his election win. And of course, he still gave his 51st state pitch, which the prime minister had rebuffed. Trump did indicate that he would not be budging on tariffs and would use them as a way to rebuild the U.S. manufacturing capacity, but in the same meeting also suggested that the Canada-US-Mexico free trade agreement might not be necessary anymore. And keep in mind, Trump does change his mind regularly, but this is what came out of the meeting earlier this week on Tuesday. Mark Carney did confirm that he'll have another face-to-face with Trump when Trump comes to Canada in June for the G7 conference. So here are some key dates about what is going to come next for House of Commons and politics in general. Is they will name the cabinet next week, and it's very important to highlight that the Prime Minister's office and other departments really need to recruit a lot of staff. The staff that were there that were experienced and had a lot of background, they had long since quit because they had seen the polling numbers from last year and felt it was time to leave and find work in the public sector. So that left a skeleton crew in many departments. So it's going to take a long time to staff up. And that means that the new staff and the ministers as well are going to have to take, not a whole lot of time to get up to speed on their new files. May 26th is when Parliament will resume. And on that day, they need to choose a new Speaker of the House of Commons. The very next day, the speech from the throne will be delivered by King Charles, and that is the first time a monarch has delivered a Canadian throne speech in about 50 years. Now, just a couple other points before I pass it on to Kevin, is that CHBA recommendations and our concerns we had already delivered to government officials as well as the Liberal platform team. They are well aware of our industry concerns and challenges, and we're going to continue communicating with these recommendations to the Prime Minister, as well as the other key ministers such as finance and housing and several other cabinet ministers once they are appointed. And as I mentioned, we will find that out next week. So I would like to now pass it on to Kevin to go more in depth into our recommendations to the government.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Nicole. And we did get a good segue question in, which was, does have the Trump tariffs and his stance on tariffs affected our sector transition strategy and our overall advocacy work? And that's a perfect question. I don't really need to answer it in depth right now because we'll talk about it as we move forward here. But there's no question we were operating within that environment of a tariff world, and I think some of the things that came through were as a result of that, and certainly our asks around housing became all that more pressing, and that actually was interesting within the campaign itself too, because even though tariffs was top of mind, this is, some more information from Abacus, housing affordability and availability was still the second-rated thing that Canadians wanted to hear about. And as Nicole was talking about, yes, there was this overall concern about Trump and tariffs, but housing affordability, healthcare, jobs in the economy, these are all ranked, very close, within 5 points of each other. So it just goes to show that this was all still very, very relevant. Now, in terms of, being ready, we were certainly well positioned for the federal relationships with strong working relationships with both the liberals and conservatives. And as we started preparing for all of this, which was really in the fall, we were preparing for that majority conservative government that everybody was predicting at the time and looked like was going to happen. And then, of course, things shifted. But of course, our job is always we're busy trying to work with the government in power and always trying to work with all parties. And frankly, the recommendations we give are pretty much identical to no matter which party is we're speaking to. So in that sense, we were in good shape, and the party leadership and platform teams were all aware of our recommendations, and we continue to engage with them through the election period as well. And a lot of our recommendations had already been taken up, frankly, in the preceding months, or were talked about in platform type announcements, for example, from the conservatives ahead of time. Obviously, we don't love all of the platform announcements. That goes without saying, and that happens all the time. But our job now is to just continue working with all parties, but obviously with a particular emphasis right now on the Liberals who are forming government, and just to keep that momentum going. We did a lot during the election campaign, beyond providing our recommendations and creating our usual documentation. We did have our affordability.ca website, which is basically our election website that we use whenever there's an election. We were populating our scorecard on the different party platforms, posting blog articles. We had questionnaires for the campaigns that could be used for EOs and HBAs if they wanted to do all candidate sessions. And of course, we had lots of communications and social media products out as well that we shared with our local and provincial HBAs. Media releases, obviously did a ton of media interviews, and provided regular updates out to our HBAs and to the membership. So where are we now? So what we'll do now is sort of walk you through mapping the government actions to date and recent government actions, as well as the commitments that have been made and pledges through the platform. And there's kind of two things we look to. There's sort of the federal budget and Canada's housing plan that was released by the Liberal government last year and was actually replete with all kinds of our recommendations. And then to that, we now add Mark Carney's plan and the platform that came through the election period. And we're going to sort of map that against our Unlocking the Door to Home Ownership, which is our main government advocacy document, the type of thing we produce each year for our Day on the Hill, and serves us well through election periods as well. Now, as much as we got a lot of things, I did before I got into the yay, we got this, yay, we got that. We obviously spend our time through the election campaign, and I don't want to paint a picture like everything is great. We know through our housing market index that sentiment amongst our membership within the industry is very, very poor. We were coming off the high interest rate environment, which was still impacting the market as interest rates came down slower than the overnight rate. The Bank of Canada has been lowering pretty quickly, but with the bond market being what it is, mortgage rates are pretty sticky. So we definitely see low builder sentiment and declining housing starts, which we still expect to continue, especially given that we've got the tariff situation that we do. And it's particularly bad in BC and Ontario. Really brutal numbers, but in 2021, our HMI, which is out of 100, was up pretty much at 90. And the prairies in Atlanta and Canada, hovering around, mid to high 40s. It's not like high school grades where that's like a fail. That's kind of neutral. So it's not too bad. And certainly Alberta until recent times has been frankly booming. But in BC and in Ontario, the single family starts and sales offices have been brutal. And the multifamily even worse, especially when you look at Ontario. I wouldn't have even thought a single digit three basically or 2.9 number was even possible in our HMI, but it just shows how dismal things are. So again, back to that question, this is a function very much of tariffs compounding interest rates and higher construction costs and everything else that had been happening before. And this certainly played into our advocacy and how we explain the situation and why there was more action that was needed. So as we get back to our advocacy asks, one of the things that we always have to emphasize is there's no silver bullet, and people are always looking, politicians especially, but even me are always like, well, there's got to be this one thing. And I think over the past couple of years, we've been successful in, really explaining that there's a lot that needs to be done, and you have to come at it from every angle. This financial system, policies, labor, lots of talk about productivity and labor shortages. We really need a holistic approach, and that needs to come from all three levels of government. And typically in government relations, like you need like three simple things to ask for. We are so far past that in our advocacy, in a good way. In that, there's been a lot of attention paid to our issues. We have a very comprehensive set and a much more detailed set of asks than most organizations are able to use because we've spent a lot of time educating politicians over recent years, and there's been a lot of attention paid. So we have these areas, sort of these 8 areas or 7.5, depending on how you want to look at it, that we said are the pathway to successfully getting to that doubling of housing starts, which is now generally accepted and was included also in the Liberal platform. And we'll look at each of those and the asks related to that. And at the top end of everything, we've been after this for years, and frankly, the government's doing a better job in recent times. Is we really need federal leadership, and one of the biggest things was getting this idea that we really need to double housing starts, and the number that CMHC came out with a couple of years ago was 3.5 million units that we needed to build over and above the 2.3 million we would normally build over the course of a decade to make up the housing gap and stop having shortage of supply affecting accelerating house prices so much. So, when the Liberal campaign came out and they talked about seeking to double housing starts to 500,000 per year over the next decade, that's pretty consistent with what we've been talking about and CMHC's been talking about. Now, can it be done in the next year or two? Of course not. There a lot still needs to change to head in that direction, but certainly we've been pushing for us to stay on that track and continue to seek to hit that kind of number. So when we look at the first tranche of more specific things, we've been really concerned about the plight of the first-time homebuyer, of course, as our entire industry has. Our big recommendations, of course, and thanks to those of you who fill out the HMI so regularly, because it gets us our meetings with the Bank of Canada before every interest rate announcement. So it's super valuable. They're hearing your concerns directly from us, thanks to the data that we get through you people completing that survey. So fortunately, interest rates have been going down. Again, mortgage rates not as fast as we would like compared to the overnight lending rate, but headed in the right direction. So check on that side of things. We have been very concerned, speak of mortgage issues, with the stress test, and we've been calling for that to be changed. We did get commitment from the Liberal government in the fall to review the stress test. So that is a big deal because nobody's wanted to deal with that for the past few years. And in talking with government officials just this week, the sense is that that is still going to proceed. Another big thing is that we've said, look, we need to get longer mortgage terms, more acceptable in Canada, and look at 7 and 10 year mortgages, and frankly, remove the stress test from those entirely. And that did come out in Carney's platform, where they did say they're going to look, it was longer than this simple line, but they're going to look at the barriers to getting longer interest rate terms for mortgages that would help create some additional opportunity, stability, and et cetera, and hopefully less stress testing in the market for us. Obviously, our huge win this past year was getting the 30-year AMs for insured mortgages for new construction and for first-time buyers, and getting that cap up to 1.5 million. And you'll note the point there was we needed to maintain that. This wasn't so much aimed at the Liberal Party. We were actually concerned that if the Conservatives came in, we might not have that continue because Pierre Poilievre hadn't been a big fan of 30-year AMs in the past. So at this stage, that looks very secure moving forward. We've also had other concerns, and without getting into the details around OSFI, they were looking at implementing ahead of the rest of the world, essentially, some new restrictions that would make it harder for our financial institutions to lend, both on the mortgage front and on business loans, which would make it harder for construction financing, productivity investment, etc. And we're pleased to say that Austria has now issued a statement that they'll be delaying until further notice the implementation of this. So again, another important win for us because that could have been really problematic. Um, the GST, of course, a big bugaboo, and it's been an issue for a long, long time, and we've advocated heavily to get changes. Both the Conservatives and the Liberals came through with addressing of the GST on new homes in their platforms. In the case of the Liberals, they've pledged to remove the GST on all homes under $1 million for first-time buyers. Now, obviously, we'd like to see that extended to all buyers of new construction, but for now, it's at first, as they said, on $1 million, but we had said that it needs to be more than $1 million prior to the campaign. And so we actually engaged with them through the campaign, and we were pleased to see that as the campaign rolled out, they added that they'll have a declining rate up to 1.5 million, which was something that we had recommended because we know the average price certainly of a single detached home in many places is well over $1 million. So that was a good thing, and we're going to continue to push for more things on the GST. But I know one of the big issues with this, and it started actually when the Conservatives pledged to remove GST on homes under $1 million back in the fall, that when you're looking at a majority conservative government at that point, some Canadians started saying, well, why would I buy a house right now if I can wait and get, the GST eliminated on that? So we have a bit of a poll question for you right now because I know it's been a concern and we are pushing to get this implemented as quickly as possible. But if we could get that poll up, it's really if you're on this call and you build homes that would be eligible for this elimination of the GST, are you having customers delay purchases so they can qualify for this elimination of the GST? Um, and we know this is a big issue. We have been pushing for this to get implemented as quickly as possible. There was some thought that it would have to wait till a budget, and we're probably not looking at that budget until June. That's not brutal. It's within weeks, but still, we know it's an issue. So we are hoping, like as was done on the GS removal on purpose-built rental, that they can just do that through an announcement. And so in our discussions with government officials, again, as recently as this week, since the election has been over, we have gotten some suggestion that it should happen pretty soon. So yeah, so looking at that, so basically 3/4 of you are in fact seeing people delay their purchases waiting for the GST. So that is a huge issue, we know, and we're going to continue to push to get that changed. Other things around taxation, we wanted to maintain the GST removal on PBR that we were successful in getting a couple of years ago. And on top of that, the Carney platform plan is going to reintroduce further tax credits for MURBs. So those are good steps, and we're going to continue to push for more removal on GST on things like accessory dwelling units, and we've always felt that for net zero homes, which are basically the cost of new construction in terms of renovation, those should be eligible as well. And speaking of secondary suites, we did want to say, we also had this other win. With the government this past year, they had first come out with a plan for 40K loans for accessory dwelling units, which really doesn't cover much at all. We said that needs to be much higher. Appreciate the support, but if we're going to get a lot more ADUs in secondary suites, we're going to need much more. So they did change their rules around mortgage insured loans and said we'll increase that limit up to 2 million for anybody refinancing to build a secondary suite, and up to 90% of that home's value will then be eligible for up to that 30-year period. So that makes a very, very big difference for what can be done. And if you're engaged with CHBA and come to our meetings like Urban Council, we've been working on all these different options. For example, with the rehousing project in the GTA and the Yellow Belt. So it's a good opportunity for modular, good opportunity for renovators and custom builders. So we are pleased to see that coming. Another huge thing that we talked about, and we did talk about this at length because we always do, but because of the tariff situation as well, made doubly important, was the need to reduce development charges there. These are obviously at the municipal level, but we've really been encouraging the government to do all it can to reduce those. So again, both the Conservatives and the Liberals did have this in their platform. The Liberal one, which we look forward to seeing implementing, is to cut municipal development charges in half for multi-unit residential housing and to work with the provinces and territories to make up that lost revenue so it keeps the municipalities whole. So obviously, we would like to see that not just for multi-unit, but for all, including single detached. So we will continue to push on that front. But in the meantime, this is a good start. And what we also want to make sure is that the government works with municipalities to make sure that there's a solution beyond the 5 years, and most importantly, that DCs aren't kept at this high rate moving forward. So a big part of what we've been working on is this second point here with in terms of alternatives to development taxes. And there's lots of different ways that that can be done. And we are glad that the feds are stepping up in terms of more housing supportive infrastructure around transit, and they have tied those to housing affordability outcomes. But they're really going to need to work with the provinces to get municipalities to find alternative mechanisms because the ever increasing and skyrocketing DC or DCC situation is one that just can't continue. And as I said, we have gotten these wins through Canada's housing plan. There is, $6 billion pledged through the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund. And in fact, when I was out in BC a few weeks ago, they signed the deal with BC to roll these funds out in that province. And the great thing about it is these are tied to these housing outcomes for legalizing more missing middle, easier for me to say, missing middle options, fourplexes, freezing DCs. And, we do have some concerns with what's going on with the NBC, the National Building Code, but I'll talk about that later. And the same with the transit funding, access transit funding. There'd have to be the elimination of parking requirements and allowing high density around transit lines and the like. So these are all good things that we expect to keep in place. When it comes to removing barriers and red tape in the whole building process, we know there are lots. The approach that the Liberals used, and they're looking to keep building on, is the Housing Accelerator Fund. It's been a little bit controversial, but we were engaged in informing CMHC when they were talking about doing it. It's basically a system that gives the municipalities money to do the things they want, like address homelessness, as long as they also do things like change and accelerate permitting process, implement e-permitting, reduce zoning restrictions. So the little Liberal platform does want to continue with that program and double down on it, including requiring public reporting on all of these things, basically to make sure that they keep the municipalities accountable to the commitments they made. So we know that's a big issue for ourselves and for our local associations. So we will continue to be to working on that. Further on red tape, one of our big issues is it's all fine to talk about red tape at the municipal level, but you also need to deal with your own house at the federal level. And so there's been ongoing red tape. We've been successful in sort of getting changes in different red tape things that have come through. One of the things that we're pleased to say seems to be dying on the vine in our discussions with government officials is the vacant land tax that was proposed last year in the budget, and they started walking back in a variety of ways. Went to consultation. We're heavily engaged in that too, but we do think that that's just not going to come back even in discussion. So we look forward to that. So the platform also talked about reducing red tape for all relevant federal departments where they're supposed to review unnecessary rules and duplication. And we certainly know a few of those, especially around the environmental front and elsewhere that we would like to see redacted. So we'll continue on that front. We have a lot of asks around the building code. It's a big challenge for us as the building code doesn't make things cheaper, but makes things more expensive these days. And there was a commitment over the past year to use that building code to make things cheaper. And we saw in the Carney platform that they'd accelerate reform and simplification of the building code to speed up approvals and streamline regulations. And we are all in favor of that in principle, but the proof is in the pudding here, and we haven't seen that to date. So we will continue to push on that front because the code stuff has been not headed in the right direction. One of the things that, of course, has been being pushed into the building code at a very accelerated pace, more than is really affordable for most Canadians, is on the energy front, which is why we've really said you really need to focus on the existing housing stock. So we are pleased to see in the campaign an expectation of continued funding for home retrofits, because it's really the existing housing stock that we need to focus on with regards to GHGs. When it comes to the labor shortage, we sort of have three pillars. It's grow the domestic workforce, fix immigration, and work on productivity. When it comes to the domestic workforce, we have a lot of work to do still. We are seeing better promotion of careers in construction, and the federal government has been playing a part in that. We actually need to change how we educate and train our trades. So that'll be an ongoing piece of work. But there was quite a bit in the Liberal platform on supporting labor, and a lot on apprenticeships. So supporting training costs. A revival of the apprenticeship service which was being phased out. So that would be good. And I know many of our members were making use of that. Providing $15,000 in upskilling and training. We'll see what kind of form that takes. Is this a return of the Canada training plan that they had before that was more employer driven, which we were supportive of, or there was another benefit that they tried to roll out that was more at the discretion of the employee, which was hugely problematic. So we'll be engaged in that. And then a variety of other things that you're talking about, including 20 million for capital funding streams for colleges, and we would suggest that's great for apprentices, but also needs to be directed at the trades in home building that aren't necessarily apprenticeable trades. When it comes to immigration, again, a few things in there that would relate to us conceivably with respect to revitalizing a global skills strategy to attract talent, working with the provinces to speed up recognition of foreign credentials, and leveraging digital tools to reduce processing time. That's all fine, but we actually need dramatic changes to the system itself, because right now we're really not capable within the express entry system, that is the principal economic means for bringing in immigrants. We really can't get the people that we need at scale in home construction. So we have a lot going on in this area, and we'll continue to push on that front. The last area is really around the labor shortage and productivity. And one of the questions earlier was around our sector transition strategy. This was really about responding to productivity, responding to there was quite a bit of interest in modular construction, which is great, because we started our Modular Construction Council in 2017, knowing that we had this labor shortage upon us and that we needed to move forward with getting more factory built done. But it's not as simple as, well, we'll just throw money at it, or why doesn't the industry do it that way? So the sector transition strategy really explained the challenges to go ahead and doing that. And when we released it, we got huge media take up last year. 210 million views, reads within the first 24 hours. There's just so much interest in this. And the sector transition strategy was really about trying to bring some reality to it. It resulted in me being invited to be on the expert panel that the federal government put forward on an industrial strategy for home building. I was invited to the Liberal cabinet retreat last summer, and it really gave us an opportunity to talk about the other things, because you can't have a lot more prefab and factory built if you just can't sell housing and get housing into the market. So this is where we talked about you got to deal with a stress test, you got to deal with a GST, you got to deal with DCs, and then these other things that are specific to modular and factory built, like getting rid of duplication of things with respect to the CSA 8277 standard, de-risking financing, etc. So, it was a great opportunity to talk about all of our basic asks around housing, but also inform how could you do more of the factory built. Now, what did we get? So out of the in the platform itself, we got the idea that they want to eliminate duplicative inspections, exactly what we asked for. They want to extend expensive for manufacturing machinery and equipment. That's at large, but something that can be made use of by our factories. Um, this isn't a sector transition thing, but some of the things under this new Build Canada Homes initiative are related to the sector transition. Providing debt financing for innovative prefab home builders, which is something we asked for. Providing bulk orders for social affordable housing, so you sort of get long-term, big volume orders that enable you to invest and supportive affordable home builders by injecting low-cost financing. And we have talked about the need for low-cost financing, not just for affordable homes, but more supportive financing for construction financing because it's just getting harder and harder. Now, the thing that the Building Canada Homes Initiative has gotten the most attention on is this idea of getting the federal government back into building housing at scale. Obviously, we have questions, comments, concerns. If they stick to public lands and if they do hire and engage builders, developers for the actual construction phase of the projects. This could be something that works if it's affordable housing and starts to address some of the inclusionary zoning issues that we have and alleviate some pressure there. That could be good. Whether this in its entirety can revitalize how we build homes in Canada at large. And this is certainly in and of itself not going to get us to that 500,000 homes mark that has been suggested. We're going to be engaged in this heavily. We've already started talking to government officials on this as they try and figure out what this actually means. But some of the things here are indeed things that we asked for. So as we wrap up here and get towards some of your questions that have been flying in, we're going to continue to engage on all fronts. As you've heard, we've already gotten meetings underway. In fact, we had lots of meetings during the election campaign, which is very unusual. Usually the government goes into caretaker mode and won't talk to anybody, but we had lots of meetings. And as soon as that cabinet is announced, we'll be engaged that way and be right into our normal year-round activities, engaging with meetings, consultations, and committee appearances. And when we released our benchmarking study a few weeks ago, we almost didn't do it because it was the day of the tariffs. March 4th, Trump was announcing, but we decided to go ahead. We got huge coverage anyway, over 71 million views in the first 24 hours. And again, we talked about DCs and we talked about GST, and that now was the time. It was the way you fight tariffs. And so I think maybe part of the reason we got these things in the budget was through that advocacy and the connecting of the tariffs to you need to act now. DC, if you reduce DCs and you get rid of the GST, you can more than offset the costs from these things. And when we got our 30-year AMs, I was on with David Cochran on Power and Politics talking about it, and we talked a little bit about the labor shortage. So the next day, Minister Fraser was on, and he was asked about this idea that we have 22% of our workforce retiring in our sector, and the minister said, well, listen, before I answer that question, I just want to give kudos to CHBA for providing invaluable advice that helped lead to the policies the federal government is rolling out that we believe will help scale production. So we want to keep that kind of influence and those kind of discussions alive and well as we move forward. And with that, we'll flip over to your many, many, many questions. I've been watching it populate as we go here. So we'll sort of take it from the top. I'll do the first one because it's pretty easy. What are your thoughts on the Liberal government introducing a home equity tax? I think that's died on the vine a couple of times already, and it's hugely unpopular. Can't see that going forward. Nicole, any further comment on that?
Yeah, I just noticed that there seems to be some misconception amongst some people that this is something that Carney did introduce or plans to introduce. He has said no such thing, and as Kevin said, it's going to be politically unpopular, and it's something that is would be wild to try and introduce. So I don't think this is a concern immediately.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. In terms of housing minister, question in, what does the crystal ball say about the next housing minister? Is Fraser coming back? Is Erskine Smith sticking in somebody new? Nobody really knows. I will say this. This is not a political statement, but something about a person. Fraser was awesome. He was a really good housing minister. He really got it. He really understood things. We would have no problem if he were to come back as housing minister. Ernst Smith tends to lean a little bit further left, and a little bit more on the social housing side, maybe a little bit more on that building Canada homes type of approach to things. But at this stage, we really don't know. What is your crystal ball say, Nicole?
As much as yes, it would be really good for Fraser to come back because he really did get the issues. I think that agreeing to return and to run again, because as you most of you probably know, he decided to step out of politics, not run again. Mark Carney pulled him back in, kind of like the mafia. You can't leave; they'll try and pull you back. But I don't think it's going to be in housing. I think he probably wants to try a new portfolio.
Yeah. So here's a good question. So it looks like the Liberals are keen to adopt the CHBA recommendations on modular and prefab acceleration. What does this mean for stick builders, custom home builders, etc.? So listen, we know that there's a labor shortage. We know that it's going to be challenging. We also have always felt there's always going to be lots of room for stick built and site built and custom homes. But how do we deal with our labor shortage? The way we could best deal with our labor shortage would be if we could get more factory built going. And the analogy that I've used that I hope explains it best is there was a time when we would site build all of the kitchen cabinetry. You'd bring in a carpenter and they'd be in for days, weeks, and they'd be doing all that on site. Obviously, that's crazy talk now because you bring in you talk to your kitchen supplier and in it comes in smaller modules, and that's how we do it. So one of the things that our sector transition strategy is about is not moving everything into modular because frankly, modular isn't going to work for in a lot of instances. Panelized will work for a lot more situations. And so your typical builder, your typical site builder might find it way more efficient and easier to move to panelized systems if we had a good industry that was able to support our builders. So that's been a big part of it. And so it's certainly an attempt to support the challenges of our site builders as well as provide opportunity for them to invest. Some of our bigger builders would be able and developers would be able to invest more and under the right conditions. And then obviously existing plants could expand if we were good on this. Um, in terms of the GST, in terms of qualifications based on signing the contract, possession date, we don't know. So we do want to see that as quickly as possible. With respect to PBR, it was on breaking ground. So we're still waiting to see all of that. So still to be determined. What else have we got here? How would reducing DCs affect under construction units? Any insights if the builder would get a rebate for already paid DCs on units that are not sold yet? You want to play with that for a second, Nicole? I'll start by saying governments never like retroactive stuff.
No, certainly Kevin is correct in that they don't like retroactive stuff. We have tried on other issues. And it is one of those things that because we don't currently have a line of sight into that, and part of the reason is very much of this is probably that the Carney government also does not have a line of sight. You have to remember that they ran a really quick leadership campaign and ran right into an election. And a lot of this policy is very sort of top level, and they haven't even gotten themselves into the granularity yet. So I don't even know if I'm able to sort of answer that question because I'm not even sure that, we have a good idea yet.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. My expectation is I can't see it being retroactive, but we shall see. And certainly that might be a bit of a municipal thing as well, working locally. Here's a bit of a longer one, but it is interesting. So, if Canadian birth rates are under two per couple, then the only thing pushing the housing needs and thus also demand and cost up is immigration and legislation. Should we not be encouraging the government to cool immigration alongside legislation changes so we can catch up on the housing shortage? I understand that this reduced pressure will decrease demand for homes and cool the market, but isn't that the idea? Do you want to just talk a little bit about what the government plan is on immigration numbers, Nicole?
Sure. So the government has actually, even before Justin Trudeau had resigned, started to make the move to reduce immigration, primarily to do with the number of temporary residents like students. So that is already underway. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and Kevin highlighted it during the presentation about sort of other ways to improve the immigration system to ensure that it doesn't impact our really great labor needs in this sector. And part of that concern is at the moment, the people who would qualify to come in to work, on building sites, et cetera, they're never the ones that are accepted. So there has to be a looking at how they're going to make this system work for our industry, yet at the same time, they, of course, want to reduce the number of immigrants. So just we need to certainly have immigrants who want to come here and help us build those homes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's why we're really focused on getting the right people in through the immigration system, because the numbers are going to be down a little bit, but we need the people who do come in to really have the right skills and qualifications to and desire to work in residential construction. Here's a question on harmonization with the building code. The National Building Code harmonization is interesting in many ways. BC can be seen as a leader. Any insights into single egress stairs in the MBC? So yeah, that work is very much underway. Get the usual pushback from the firefighters, even though we're practically the only country in the world that doesn't have it. So I do expect that should push ahead successfully in the National Building Code. In terms, next question is, do we have any further insight or thoughts on the tax incentive for purpose built multi-unit rental housing? Seems like a game changer for spring construction. I can say that in the platform, they did say sort of, I can't remember the exact wording, was basically return to or reestablish the tax system. So if you're in the PBR game, you could take a look at what used to be in place. But there are really no details on this at this stage. So really to be determined, but the government is certainly keen in this area. So I expect it'll be pretty lucrative. Any other thoughts on that, Nicole?
No, just very much what you said. It seems to be that they have recognized that previous programs seem to be very beneficial, and it looks to be what they intend to bring back.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. What have we got here? Has the government said anything about how it expects to share our already limited labor resource when it comes to their plan to build housing themselves? Are those human resources covered in their modeling to increase labor numbers? I will say that if you look at what's been put forth there, the general intent is to use the private sector to do the construction. So, and now the pursuit of, increasing housing starts is going to require more people and or better productivity. So all of our stuff on immigration and all the rest still holds. And certainly, we'll be very clear. And I've already started these discussions as well with government officials, and they know, like, obviously the government can't be in a position of competing in any way with the private sector. So that will be a key message for us. But I do expect that they certainly at this, even in the platform, they doesn't suggest that they're going to go out and start hiring framers and carpenters and form workers and all the rest. Like it says that the intent would be to use the private sector to go ahead and do that building. Um, Next question. Any talks about getting rid of the foreign buyer ban? Um, Not officially at all. What I will say is one of the recommendations that we had that I didn't cover today because we had enough to cover is that we really do need to re-look at everything we've done to prevent foreign investment. It's going to take trillions of dollars to build the amount of housing we need, and that amount of money isn't available in Canada. And in fact, some of the things that we've done have really encouraged people to invest in foreign or to invest even in purpose-built rental in other countries instead of in Canada. So our recommendation is that at this time we really need to look at how do we streamline, how do we reduce all of the restrictions we put on foreign investment so that we can get some foreign capital into this country to build the amount of housing that we actually need. Um, Here's another one on labor, Nicole, with asking the government to create a program for skilled workers that Trump is pushing out of the U.S. and bringing them here for a period of time be an option. You want to play with that
Huh.
one?
Whoever suggested that might find themselves with a job in the PMO because that is something I haven't heard them suggest, but that is actually possibly certainly a concern. So while it hasn't been discussed, these are all sort of the ramifications and what happens with the uncertainty going on with tariffs. So nothing yet, but it's still early days with the Trump presidency.
Yeah, and to build on that and your idea, if you want a job in PMO, you might have one, whoever asked that question. There was as I was skimming through the other sections of the platform, there was another place where there was looking to attract, it wasn't in construction, but it was in looking to attract talent from the US because of the Trump situation. And so yeah, it's definitely something that could be possible. Um, Here, next question. Has there been any indication of timing on the potential 50% development charge reduction on multi-unit homes? Um, Nicole, do you want to answer that?
No, unfortunately, a lot of the policy announcements from the campaign were very high level. And when they announced them on the campaign and were asked in follow-up questions by reporters, they don't have the details. And as I said, there was not a lot of runway between when Mark Carney became leader and when the election happened. It was a grand total of 1 week. So while I think, there is certainly a policy with a step in the right direction, the devil is in the details, and they don't have them yet. And we are going to, as soon as the new housing minister is announced, we're going to be pushing to find out more information on all of these things.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. I just noticed the timer a couple of minutes over. We are committed to continuing here to answer questions. If you do have to drop off, we understand the recording will be available tomorrow, as I said. So thank you for joining. If you haven't been able, if you have to leave, I'll also note that on the screen here is that QR code. If you're interested in all of this and you're already not receiving our industry highlights, which goes out 3 times a week and covers this kinds of stuff, it's a quick media scan with commentary. Just catch that QR code and we'd encourage you to start receiving those. Next question. The current national code development process seems to be flying under the political radar. Is CHB advocating to have more eyes on this process and make it more transparent? How are you looking to influence policy direction, which is largely looking to electrify everything? Um, yeah. So, as I said in my earlier commentary, there's the nice words about we'll use the building code and we want to streamline things and we want to make it more affordable, but that's not exactly what's happening. So, yes, we are obviously heavily engaged, and I really want to shout out to all of our members across the country who are working with us, engaged in that national code development process. We are pushing it more and more through the political channels as well, and actually collaborating with our provincial counterparts too, because the way the system has been restructured, the provincial counterparts have even more transparent say. They used to have sort of clandestine say. There was a group, it was called PDPAC, which was the Provincial Territorial Advisory Committee on Codes, and some people didn't even know who the reps were. Now it's all out in the open, and they have much more say. So pushing back on things like electrification and that sort of thing, that's the route to do it. And yes, we're definitely engaged and looking to do even more on that front because it is a challenge. Um, let's see, on to the next one. Does the federal government understand the water and wastewater infrastructure is a significant hurdle to delivering homes to Canadians? You want to just talk about infrastructure investment there quickly, Nicole?
Sure. So they certainly are looking into infrastructure investment. I do believe they certainly understand the importance of it. There is, I believe, a mention in the platform that this is going to continue to be an important part of Carney's government, especially as they try and continue with the Housing Accelerator Fund and other ways in which they are going to try and deal with municipalities on perhaps withholding money for infrastructure if they certainly don't meet certain housing targets.
Um, so here's another one on land. Bringing land costs down would decrease many costs and permit builders to meaningful price their homes both competitively but attainably. How can we get these land costs down first and foremost to encourage development? There's no question that land has been the biggest driver of accelerating house prices, especially around larger urban centers. And everybody knows the closer you are, the more expensive it is, and the old drive till you qualify has been a factor for a long time. Um, the easiest way to get rid of some of the cost of land is really around the DC thing, because that gets embedded in those land costs. Obviously, opening up more land also would help a great deal, which most municipalities are very reticent to do. So it's very difficult. It's very tricky. The other thing that helps to make more affordable land more accessible, because that's usually the trick, is bigger investments in transit. And although we're a long way away, even things like there's talk about high-speed rail and rail corridors, for example, between Quebec City and down to southern Ontario. Even talk between Calgary and Edmonton and those types of things. And when you get high-speed transit, it enables people to access more affordable land. So it's a tricky situation, but there are definitely some things that can be done there. Here's a question. Do you know if the government will consider selling unused federal lands and consider controlling the build rather than retain land ownership? They haven't been willing to do that yet. Um, Although when they first announced they were going to start releasing lands and it was all going to be land leases, we immediately said, if you want this done fast, sell it. Land leasing is way too complicated. Our industry isn't used to it. It'll be much less attractive. And again, I just had that discussion this week with senior officials, saying if you want it to happen fast, sell it. Don't rely on land leasing. So I don't know that they're really going to want to go there, unless, but there might be what their real concern is retaining affordable housing units on that land. So if we can work with them to find ways that they can retain those units in perpetuity, I think that's really what they're after. But we shall see. I can also say that Nicole, who also is our staff lead on our urban council, and we've got our urban council meeting coming up next week. We're going to be talking about how do you work with leased land, and there's actually quite a bit of experience out in BC and then in some other parts of the country where some of our developers have found it quite good to work with land lease situations. So we're gonna be working on that and getting that information out afterwards because land leasing might be an interesting opportunity, certainly for developers. It's not that different, I suppose one could say, from condos where you kind of build and then maybe you can get out, depending on how all that works. So we shall see more to come on that. Um, Here's another question. Do you think barriers to cross-provincial trade and cross-provincial labor will be removed, and if so, when? all timing questions are very difficult. In terms of, there's definitely some huge momentum on this front. Um, and I would extend that to uh, what we're pushing for is less trade barriers between municipalities by them introducing all these different interpretations of the building code, zoning, etc. It becomes very difficult to build the same house just, literally across the street from one municipality to the other. So there's quite a bit of momentum there. By the way, some of the cross-provincial labor barriers have been purposely put up by the provinces themselves from time to time. And so I think there's going to be quite a bit of work done here. But I probably the provincial trade barriers will be a little easier than some of the labor barriers, but we shall see. Do you want to add to that, Nicole?
So yes, certainly there is momentum there, and part of it, well, I'd say a great part of it is because of the tariffs coming from the U.S. Suddenly, it had become the number one issue in Canada. So at least there is sort of political will there now in terms of getting the cross-provincial trade. I think premiers are certainly more amenable to discussing it right now, but and I think it's a bit like herding cats. You have to sort of get all the premiers on board. But I think that there's more goodwill with the premiers to work with Mark Carney on that than there was to work with Justin Trudeau. So it certainly is in the nearer future than it would have been under the previous prime minister.
Perfect. We've had a couple of questions around the GST exemption being expanded to all buyers rather than just first-time buyers. Yes. That was our recommendation and ask in the very first place. The Liberals did restrict it just to first-time buyers. So we will be continuing to push on that front. Obviously, restricting it to first-time buyers is a little cheaper, less revenue loss, which is why they would go there. And there's a push to support first-time buyers. Our argument on that, though, is that A, you need more housing supply of all types. B, by removing GST for not first-time buyers, you can get the people who are in entry-level homes and existing housing out and into a move-up home essentially, and free up housing for first-time buyers in the existing housing market. So we will continue to push on that. Here's an interesting one. How can CHBA help more of our single-family builders move towards building small MURBs? I can tell you we've never considered doing that at the CHBA level. My association hat says, man, that's exactly what associations are for in terms of talking to your colleagues, because several of our members, of course, are moving in that direction. But if you wanna flip us an email, I mean, the first thing I'd do is look to connect you with somebody who has done this and made this transition. But we can definitely consider, is there something we should be doing in this front? But we definitely have lots of expertise across the country with lots of members who have not gone ahead and done that. Question from a net zero builder on electrification. The existing electrical code has not been updated in some time. Is there a push to update the electrical code? We do get engaged with the building code. It's pretty much constantly under revision. I know there's issues around battery storage and that kind of thing that we're looking to take care of. And we have our constant fight with AFCIs that shouldn't be in there at all in the first place. So we could continue to engage on the electrical code. I'm not sure when the exact date is for the publication of the next one, but we can definitely get back to you on that because we do have our staff working away on that. Um, Here's a question. Would it make sense for the GST exemption to be expanded to existing homes? This would allow current smaller homeowners to opportunity to move into a new home. There's no GST on existing homes. So that's not the case. So the GST is only applied to new construction. What I can say about existing homes is we're pushing for GST exemption on different when you redo things. Like if you're adding accessory dwelling units or if you're adding a secondary suite, you're creating a new housing unit. And so we're arguing that the cost of that should be GST exempt as well because we're trying to create more housing unit. Um, And then last question here, would waiving GST for purchases affect our ability to claim back GST we pay services and goods, and that's something that we were asking as well. And evidently, there's going to be a way to still claim your input tax credits with respect to GST. So we'll have to look for the details on that. But the intent is to definitely not have the idea is industry isn't supposed to have to pay GST. That's supposed to be ultimately passed on to the end user, and so that should be okay. Um, Here's another question. Has the CHB intervened and advanced a position on the different green development standards being adopted by each municipality and how these can either be eliminated or harmonized into provincial codes to maintain consistency? We aren't engaging directly on that, but this is exactly the type of thing I was talking about earlier. These are basically trade barriers. There's certainly productivity barriers. So we've been making the case. I've been making the case. I made that case extensively through our consultation on that expert panel on industrial strategy. So even though that was more about manufactured housing, we can't manufacture housing at scale if every time we go to put it somewhere, we're dealing with a different green development standard. So we're happy. We are collaborating a little bit with the provinces on this front, and we're definitely putting that message forward at the national level. So that is underway. We know it's a huge issue, and hopefully in this era of we need to break down trade barriers. Hopefully we can get and as you know, the municipalities are creatures of the province. It would really come down to the provinces to stepping in on that, but we can do our part with the federal government to really help encourage that and help see that happen. All right. I think we might be at the very end. I don't see any more, and I think we've knocked off every single question that came in. Apologies if I missed anything. But we will wrap up here, I think. And if you have any further questions, fire them in, and we can respond to you directly. But I want to thank everybody for attending today. And again, if you're interested in this stuff and you're not receiving industry highlights, clip that QR code, and you'll get a little rundown on what we're doing and what's going on in the news and everything. 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And if you don't want to read them, you can just read them on Friday. We have our weekly wrap up. And if you don't get around to it, there's always stuff going on, and you can read the other stuff in future weeks. So thanks, Nicole, for the rundown and all your hard work through this election campaign. Hopefully we'll see many of you in Victoria, BC, starting on Sunday. And thanks a lot for joining us. We hope this was informative for all of you. And we'll try and keep doing the work we're doing to make it easier and better for you guys to build and develop across and renovate across the country. Thanks again.